Hi everyone, this video is part 3 of the cognition unit. In this video I will cover thinking and language. So to start with, we should define cognition. Cognition is just an overarching term to describe our thinking and thought processes. And there are some foundational words you should know before we start. These words help us to just understand the way we think about objects in the world. So the first one is the word concept, and concept refers to a mental grouping of objects. And we group those objects in a concept of similarities. If they have similar qualities, we put that into the same concept. So for example, bird might be a concept for you, and any animal that is winged and has a beak and it flies, you might consider that a bird. Those might be qualities that you put into your concept for bird. A prototype would be a mental image that you have, or an example that you think of when you hear that, maybe the word bird, or when you think about that concept, the example or representation you have in your mind. That is a prototype. So it's this best example of the category. It's your mental image of something that fits into that category or represents that category. So if you think about bird, I want you to pick on the next slide which bird is the image that comes to mind when you think of the word bird. So when you think of the word bird, what image best represents your concept for bird? For me, when I think of bird, this is what comes to mind. I think of a robin, and that probably is influenced by my context. I live in the Midwest in the United States, and a lot of the birds I'm exposed to look like this. But depending on where you live, that might influence your prototype. But I imagine you might be like me, and you probably, when you hear bird, your first thought probably isn't an ostrich. But an ostrich fits into that concept because it fits the qualities of bird. But this would be our prototype, likely. If you are like me, this might be your prototype for bird. I want you to think about a dog, and I want you to think about which image fits your prototype that comes to mind. When you hear the word dog, what do you think of when you think of a dog? Now, of course, all of these images are dogs, but if you're like me, I think my prototype for a dog is this type of Labrador, and I think it might have to do with maybe media representation of dogs, and maybe they are more common, but that's what I think of when I think of dog. That's my prototype, but that doesn't mean that all of these other animals aren't dogs. This is just my example that comes to mind when I hear the term dog, and that's a prototype. So next we have problem-solving strategies, and there's two types of strategies we use to solve a problem. Algorithms are a methodical way of solving a problem. You follow a step-by-step procedure and it will get you to the end. It's a foolproof method. You're guaranteed to get to the end of the solution if you just follow the steps. A disadvantage of an algorithm, though, would be sometimes it takes longer. It might be a little more laborious, and you got to get, it might be a little even more cumbersome to follow all these steps. A heuristic is a simpler and easier strategy. It's like you just go figure it out and you don't use the step-by-step method. Sometimes this might be like a trial and error. You just go for it. You just figure it out. A lot of people will choose heuristics when they're trying to solve a problem. They just want to do it by themselves and just figure it out. And sometimes it can be easier and faster, but it is error prone and you might not get to the correct solution. So here's an example of algorithms versus heuristics. When people get furniture pieces they have to put together, you immediately have to decide, am I going to follow the assembly instructions or am I just going to try to do it by myself? If you just try to do it by yourself, you might get it right, and it might be quicker and easier than following the instructions, but you might also get it wrong. So if you follow the assembly instructions, that's an algorithm that's supposed to set you up to get you to follow this formula to get to the end and to get to the right solution in the end. So that's the difference between algorithms and heuristics. There are different types of heuristics of figuring it out, just using your own thoughts and thinking to just figure it out quickly. And you would use these to make judgments. So one is an availability heuristic. This is when you make judgments, and you'd make judgment based on information that is most readily available in your mind. You just make a quick judgment off of something you most recently heard or is just fresh in your mind. This isn't necessarily bad, but it can lead you to making a decision without thinking about other relevant information. And you could make a decision that is is not the best decision. So here's an example. This man decides he's never, well, maybe he's going to Florida, okay? And he needs to go to Florida, and he either needs to take a plane or a car, and he chooses to take a car because maybe he recently heard about a plane crash and he's worried about the safety of airplanes. And so he decides to drive to Florida. So he made that decision based on the information most readily available in his mind. He used an availability heuristic rather than actually looking at the research and finding out, is it safer to ride in an airplane than a car? And if he did, he'd find out it probably is safer to ride in a plane, and that there are more car accidents than there are plane crashes. But he used what was most fresh in his mind, and so he is deciding to drive to Florida. A representative heuristic is judging, making a judgment call based on a prototype. It's this representation you have. And this isn't necessarily bad, but it could lead you to making not the best decision. So an example of this would be if I need to hire a babysitter and I have 2 applicants here, and rather than looking at their resumes and calling their references, because that takes a long time, I just make a quick decision and I base it off of my prototype for a babysitter, and I think, you know what, I think this lady is going to be a great babysitter, I'm going to call her. And maybe I made that choice because of a prototype that I view babysitters as, you know, my prototype for babysitters is this young teenage girl, and so I think she's going to be the better babysitter, rather than going through the process of actually calling them and talking to them and calling their references and looking at their experiences. But I made that decision based on what I think babysitters look like, rather than actually looking into whether this man would be a good babysitter or not. Next is obstacles to problem solving. So there are obstacles like being overconfident. So we're trying to solve a problem and we could be wrong, but we're so confident in our judgments that we miss that. And overconfidence is we have the tendency to overestimate how accurate our judgments are. Another one is mental set. We have the tendency to approach problems in the way that we were successful in the past, and that might not always mean we're going to be successful in the future, but we want to approach that in ways that are familiar to us. Another issue with problem solving is we have the tendency to only see things for their intended purpose. So functional fixedness is an obstacle to problem solving where we can only see the original or intended purpose of an object and we can't see other uses for it. So if we were given all of these objects and your problem was you need to attach the candle to the wall, you might really struggle because you might only see the intended purposes. You might try to take this thumbtack and stick the candle to the wall with the thumbtack, and that will not work because the thumbtack's not big enough. So you might struggle if you only see everything's intended purposes, which is functional fixedness. But if you can overcome functional fixedness and you can kind of think about new ways to use things, you could pull this box out of the matchbox, this bottom piece. You could set this this bottom piece of the matchbox up to the bulletin board. You could take the tack, you can push the tack through the wall of the box, and then you could put the candle on that box lid or the box bottom piece, and then it could sit upright in that box and it could be suspended attached to the wall. But you may not have thought about using this box in that way. The last part of problem solving and having trouble making the best decisions and these obstacles to making the best decision is framing. And framing is when you present an issue a certain way, and the way you've presented that issue impacts the way that you make a decision. So the way that you frame something can shape the decision you make. So this is actually the same yogurt, but if we frame this differently, it might influence the yogurt that you choose to buy. So if you see this packaging says frozen yogurt contains 20% fat, this one says frozen yogurt contains 80%, or it's 80% fat free, I'm sorry. You probably would likely choose the 80% fat free because that sounds really positive, where contains 20% fat sounds really negative, when in actuality it's actually advertising the same thing, but framing influenced your decision. Next, we have biases and how biases impact our judgment making. One of them is called confirmation bias, and that's when we have the tendency to seek out information that supports our beliefs. So we're actually just confirming what we believe because we're only consuming information that supports our belief system. Belief perseverance is the tendency to hold on to our beliefs when we're presented with contrary evidence. So if someone brings you with all of this evidence that disproves what you believe and you decide to disregard that and you set that evidence aside and you just go on persevering, believing what you believe regardless of the evidence, that would be belief perseverance. So if this man believes that he is not going to get cancer and he just keeps on smoking and his doctor says, hey, we have all this scientific evidence that says this is leading you towards the path to lung disease, it's leading you to the path of emphysema and cancer, and we know that this is an end result, and he just says, I just don't believe that. That would be belief perseverance. Next, we have creativity, and creativity is when you can come up with new and novel ideas. Convergent and divergent thinking is referring to the solution. So convergent thinking is when there are a narrow availability of solutions and there's only one possible solution and you're trying to get to that one possible answer or solution. Divergent thinking is where there are many possible solutions and many possible answers. Insight is when the solution or answer just comes to you. It just pops in your mind. You have this sudden realization of the solution. And this was an example. Wolfgang Kohler did a study with a chimpanzee to see if the chimpanzee could come up with a solution to the problem that he had never seen before. And so what he realized was the chimpanzee had insight. Not having ever seen any animal with this problem where it's suspended, the bananas are suspended really high, the chimpanzee just immediately thought to stack the boxes, got on top of the boxes and got the banana. And Wolfgang Kohler called this insight, a sudden realization of a solution. Next, we have language, and language just refers to the spoken, written, or signed words in which we use to communicate with one another. Phonemes are the smallest unit of sounds in language. So the word chat, if we could break that up into the smallest units of sound, we would have ch, at. So we would have 3 units of sound, or phonemes, in chat. Morphemes are the smallest units of language that carry meaning. So chat itself, that has meaning, so that would be 1. But some words have multiple morphemes in them that hold multiple sets of meaning. Like the word submarine has 2 morphemes because sub means below and marine means water. And so that would be a situation where there's multiple morphemes in a single word or multiple units of meaning. Grammar is just a system of rules in language. Semantics refers to the meaning that we give to our words in language, and then syntax refers to the way we arrange our words and the structure of our sentences. So next we have language acquisition, and acquisition just means acquiring. It's believed that there's a critical period for acquiring language, that there's a time when we're most sensitive to learning language, and that's in childhood. And that is believed based on a case study of a girl named Jeannie who experienced severe abuse, and she was not exposed to language. She was found at age 13 and she was never able to really acquire language. And so it was believed through her situation and her case study that there's a critical period for learning language that happens in childhood where you need to be exposed to language. There is a critical period for second language development, and it is believed that developing a second language is most easy, or you are most sensitive to it, in your early years, and it declines into adulthood. As far as language development goes, there is a process for how that occurs, from babbling to using one word at a time, putting 2 words together like mom, go. Telegraphic speech comes next, like putting multiple words together, mom, go walk, and then actually putting structures together. Next, we have the different parts of the brain responsible for speech. So Broca's area, which is responsible for speech production, and Wernicke's area, that's responsible for speech comprehension, both being on the left side of the brain. Aphasia is when there's damage to those areas and it impairs language. Next would be theories of language and how language impacts our thinking. Benjamin Whorf's theory of linguistic determinism basically states that language shapes the way that we think, and our words influence the way we think about the world. Noam Chomsky, his theory of universal grammar is that we as humans have this innate ability to have language, and it's something we're born with and unique to us as humans, and that grammar is something that is innate within us. I hope this was helpful. In this video, we learned about thinking, problem solving, creativity, and language. And if you have any questions, definitely please reach out.